Let's knit the Easy Life Knit Placemats by Yarnspirations.com. Today I'm going to show you both separately on needles and on the loom. Welcome back to another Yarnspirations tutorial. I'm your host Kristen Mangus of GoodKnitKisses. Let's get started. In today's tutorial, you'll need a bulky number 5 weight yarn. We're using Bernat Maker Home Deck in color Aqua. Today's pattern is the Easy Life Knit Placemats from Yarnspirations.com. This falls in the beginner category and you can make it on needles or a knitting loom. We're going to get started here. I want you to first know that we'll need Bernat Maker Home Deck. You'll need 3 balls of your yarn. They've got steel blue in the pattern and I happen to be using Aqua today. 3 balls will make 4 placemats and we'll be working it in the double moss stitch, and then it's actually just turned sideways. So we'll go through all the things that you need for this pattern. Download your pattern today by clicking on the link below in the description. To make this pattern on needles, you'll need a US 10.5 or 6.5 millimeter. To make this pattern on a loom, you'll need anywhere from a large gauge loom, which is 5/8, all the way down to a small gauge loom, which is 3/8. Anyone in between this range will work. The needles are appropriate for a 5/8 gauge loom, but mine was a little loose. So if you're a very tight knitter, you can work it on this one. If you need to work loosely, you can work it on the 3/8 and even add some extra pegs. So let's get started and I'll go over both of these with you. As with any of my videos, I always suggest to go ahead and watch the entire video from start to finish so that you know where to pick back up when you want, but you can also look at the description below for timestamps of where to jump to. I will be covering needles and loom. We're going to go over the pattern first, so I suggest you keep watching. Whether you're on needles or loom, first start by downloading your pattern. If you are loom knitting this, please download your pattern and you're going to want to write down, so print it off. And on the first row is the right side, so you'll leave this alone. And on the second row, you're going to replace all the P's with K's and the K's with a P. And then this last P, a K. So it's going to be knit 2, purl 2, knit 2 at the end. And then the third row remains the same. And then the fourth row gets flip-flopped just as the second did. So the second and fourth rows are wrong side rows. They become right side rows on the loom. So this will be purl 2, knit 2, and then purl at the end on the fourth row. Otherwise, you're going to read it as usual for needles. Let's get started on the needles first. All right, so we're going to get started. We already know what materials that we need. It goes over the abbreviations of what we're going to work on. We're going to work on the knit stitch and the purl stitch, and that's the basic makeup of the stitches on here. We've got our measurements, which are 13 by 18 wide. So this particular pattern, you're actually going to be casting on this length here, which is the 13, and you're going to be working 18 inches along the side here. So you're going to see this little zigzaggy effect here, and this is the edge of what we're working on. Okay, and then we've got our gauge, which shows you how big of a stitch that you're going to get in a small amount, and the instructions are to cast on 46 stitches. So let's do that now on the needles, and I'll go over these instructions from the side. So just have your pattern printed out right there and it'll be ready to go. Because this is a beginner pattern, I want to go over the long tail cast on and how much length that you might want to use to start this off. Many people don't know. So now that we know we've got 13 inches that's going to go across here, you're going to want to measure out that 13 inches 3 times. So you're going to measure that out. You can get your tape measure and figure out the width that you want there. And then we're going to start by putting on our slip knot, or you can put it directly on your needles and not have a slip knot. So you can either do this, or I'll show you how to make the slip knot. You can make it in any way you like. I wrap it around my finger twice, put the back over the front 1 time, and then do it 1 more time. So this is a new back over the front, and then close that off. Now, I have the tail side here, and I'm going to put the tail towards me, and I'm going to put the ball towards the back. So B for back and tail towards. And I'm going to slip my needle on here and make this a little bit tighter, a little snug here so it doesn't fall off. It's loose enough to move. All right, we're going to grab our yarn here, the back part and the forward part. Go through with your fingers, your thumb and your forefinger, And now you've got this little piece here. We're going to pull it back and it becomes this slingshot. Now, some people call this a slingshot cast on or the long tail. We're going to scoop up through where the thumb is. We're going to go down where the finger is and then go down where the thumb is again. We lift our thumb off and we pull and grab this loose yarn here. That's that tail. And we've got one stitch added on. Let's do that again. So we grab it, split it, scoop up through the thumb, down through the finger, down through the thumb, and then tighten that up. Keep it loose. Whoops, that's a little too loose. Let's do that again. Put on our slip knot. Put that right in. Make sure the tail is towards you. We're going to grab it, split it, scoop up through the thumb, down through the finger, down through the thumb, and then pull that off. Okay, nice and loose. Scoop up through the thumb, down through the finger, down through the thumb, and then tighten that up. I like to keep my finger on top of my stitches here so it keeps from popping off. I was demonstrating too much and it just slid right off. But you see how I just didn't get upset and I just let it go. So we're going to go scoop up through the thumb, down through the finger, down through the thumb, and then pull that tight. Okay? So we're just going to keep going in this manner until we have 46 stitches on here. Now I'm going to make a smaller sample. This particular pattern is a 4+2 repeat, meaning it has a multiple of 4 stitches across the stitch count and then 2 are added on the end. This will help us achieve the pattern that we're looking for. Okay, so you're going to want to look at your stitch count. The stitch count in this one is 46. So if I take 2 off of that, my number is 44. And you go, okay, well, is that divisible by 4? Yes, it is, because that means there's 11 in it. So there's 11 multiples of this pattern in here. And then I've added 2 on the end to achieve the look that I want. So if you want to test this with me, you can do a swatch with 18 stitches and then learn this stitch pattern. This is the moss stitch. So I'm going to do 18. You can do 46 for the full length of your placemat. I'm going to grab my needle, and if you notice I'm using circular needles here. You can use a straight needle if it will hold all of your stitches. Otherwise, a circular is great because you can go back and forth. It doesn't have to be knit in the round, so it holds more stitches for you. It's also really nice if you're done with your stitches, you have to put your work down, you can just slide it on back and you don't have to worry about the stitches falling off. You can also get point protectors to keep them on there. So now make sure that your tail is just far away from you so that you're not working with it. The part that's coming from the ball of yarn is your working yarn, so that means you're working with that. All right, so I'm going to go into my first stitch here, and this is going to be knit 2. So I'm going to knit by sticking my needle inside this first loop here, okay, right through. We're going to take our yarn, wrap all the way around, and pull it through, making a loop, and then let this other one fall right off. Okay, so now you've got a 1 stitch over here. We're going to stick it through this left needle. So it's all the way through here. Go wrap around and then pull it on through. Now I'm holding on to it with my right hand and not letting go with it. But if you want to do that, if you're new at it, you can go stick your needle in here like this. Take your yarn, throw it around. Okay, and then pull it on through. You want to have a little bit of a tension on this so that when you pull it on through, it's not all loose and falls off. All right, now we're going to take it and then let it slide off, and you can see that you're starting to develop stitches here. All right, I'm going to go backwards. So say I'm supposed to knit 2, but I just demonstrated a 3rd one. If I've got too many, this is how you unknit, okay? Take your left needle, go into this stitch here. I'm pulling back with my right hand so I can see it. I'm going to go in here like this, and then I'm just going to let it pull off. See how easy that was? Okay, now we want to purl. So I'm going to take my yarn and bring it forward like this, and then we're going to go through the front of the leg of the stitch here. Instead of between the first and second, we're going to go into the front of the very first one. Then we're going to throw it or wrap it around this needle here. Then we're just going to push it through. See that? So the yarn was here, and I'm just pushing it through this hole here, okay, and let it slide off, and it becomes a different type of stitch. It makes this little scarf around here. Okay, we're going to do that one more time. Stick it through, wrap around, push that on through, and then let it fall off. The next stitch, so we just did 2 purls. Now we're going to do 2 knits. We need to put our yarn to the back. If we don't do that, it'll create a yarn hole, a yarn over, which creates a hole in our work here, like in a little eyelet. So we're going to go stick our needle in, make a knit stitch, do it one more time. Okay, yarn to the front again. We're going to purl. 1, 2, yarn to the back, knit, 1, 2, yarn to the front. And we're going to keep going. And I'm going a little faster, and you can just pause your video and catch up, and then meet me at the end here. I'm just going to continue going. Okay, so you knit to the end of your 46 stitches, or your 18, and then you've got 2 left. You're just going to simply knit those 2. So yarn to the back here, knit these 2 stitches. You just completed a row 1. This is a 4-row repeat. We're going to take that and turn it around. We're on to row 2. We're going to purl twice. So you notice when we knit this side, the back part gets purled. So in a double moss stitch, you're going to want 2 rows stacked up identical to each other on each side. So this side is a purl, and so I'm going to do the same stitch on this particular side. My pattern says purl 2, and so I'm going to do it. But if I notice my work, then I can tell what I'm supposed to do as well. So I'm going to purl 1, 2, right, and then I'll put the yarn to the back again, and look, there's these little flat knit stitches. See this V, 1, 2, see that V stitch? That is a purl stitch. So we're going to let 2 of them stack on top of each other, and that's the same as what the pattern says. So now I've got purl 2, knit 2, and I repeat that across. So you're going to continue repeating and work until you get to the end, and then we'll move on to the next row. Pause your video as needed. And then we've got 2 stitches left to work, which is going to be purl. So at the end of row 2, purl 2. So now we're going to move on to row 3. Row 3, you can clearly start seeing that we've got a couple of rows stacked up here. It's starting to really create a pattern. If I kept going, this would become a ribbing here if I let it keep going with purls stacked up against each other. So you'd have a 2x2 ribbing, but we're not going to do that. Now we're going to make a switch on the right side. This is the right side of our work. We're going to purl 2 again. 1, 2. Now if this is your first time, oh, I'm sorry, and then the next one is knit 2. I'm going to put this down. If this is your first time knitting and you're not sure how to tell right side or wrong side, look at where your tail is, and you can remember. And if you work this in, a nice easy way to remember is to take stitch markers and place it in the front of it. Okay, so I have a stitch marker here. I'm just going to open this up. It's a removable one, and I know that this is my right side, so I can just go through a stitch and pin that on here. And so I know every time that I see this little piece here, then I am on the right side of my work. Now, once you start recognizing your work, you may not need this stitch marker, but it's really great, especially for beginners or in a complicated pattern where you're just not quite sure. So we can continue on. We've just done two knit stitches here, and now we're going to purl again. So continue across your row. Just pause your video as you need. And at the end of row 3, we're going to purl twice. 1, 2. Okay. So now you can see how this is still, I'm looking still at third row here, and you can see how now these are alternating. I had knit stitches here, and now there's these purl bumps. So we're going to turn around, and we're going to double up on those rows again. This time we do the opposite because we're on the wrong side row. And so I'm going to knit 2, purl 2. Knit 2, purl 2. Okay, so as soon as you are done with this row, you know your 4-stitch pattern repeat, but you may not want to even look at your pattern after this because you've already got it all set up. You know that you are going to stack 2 against each other, and you know what that's going to look like. It's going to be really helpful to see these rows together. And we'll look at that just here in a second. I'm almost done with this row. It's important in knitting to really study what you just did so you know where you're going. We're going to knit the last 2 stitches on row 4. Okay, and then these 4 stitches are going to get repeated. So let me flip this over. We're back on the right side. We know that we're on the beginning of the first row is going to be knit 2, purl 2, and you can see that identified here where we have alternated in groups of, you can really see the purl bumps. Okay, so we've got a group of 2 here, over here is group of 2, and see how they alternate. Okay, so you're just going to keep that pattern up. We know that we had these purl bumps here and we're on the right side. So whenever you're on the right side, now you're going to do the opposite of what you see here. So this will be knit. So continue working this 4 pattern repeat, and I'll meet you back up when you are ready to bind off. Okay, so it does say repeat these 4 rows for box stitch pattern. I said the double moss stitched. It's the same thing. And then you're going to work these until the beginning measures approximately 18 inches or 45.5 centimeters. And we're going to end on a 2nd or 4th row of the pattern and cast off in pattern. Well, what does that mean, Kristen? Well, that means we're going to get this off of our needles and we're going to do it in the same pattern as we had before. So if you've bound off before in a very simple manner using only the knit stitch, then you can do that, but that's not in pattern. And we're going to do that showing with the purl stitch right now. So I've got this is of course a smaller sample, but you're going to be binding this off in pattern with all of your 46 stitches, but you'll do it in the same way. So we want to knit the first 2 stitches to do this in pattern, because this is the next stitch here. So let me just clarify. This is I'm ending in a row 4, so I have just finished my purl stitches, so I'm going to want to knit these because that's what I would be doing next. So I'm going to knit this stitch here, the first one, and knit the second stitch here, okay? And then I'm just going to lift the back loop over the front loop, and that is 1 stitch bound off. This next stitch here is a knit stitch, but I would purl normally, so I'm going to put my yarn to the front, and I'm going to purl that stitch. Okay, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to lift the back loop over the front loop. Okay, the next one is also a purl stitch, and then we're going to lift the back loop over the front loop. Okay, the next one is the 2 purls, and so I would be knitting here, knit 1, lift the back loop over the front loop, knit the second one, back over the front, okay, yarn to the front again. So I'm just really just looking at how the work was done before, being careful of what my stitches should be or would be. And if you do it in the opposite manner, that's fine. Just be consistent. We're making a pattern similar to the pattern that we would be making otherwise. This would be the same thing if you had worked a rib stitch, then you would be working that in pattern as well when you bind off. And so now you can see what's happening. See how it's making this little space here, so it's kind of weaving it around and making it like kind of this undulating side here. Okay, so it goes back and then forward and back and forward, and it mimics these stitches that would be next, right? If I did a knit stitch here instead of a purl, it would lay flatter and it wouldn't imitate what it looks like down here. Okay, so just continue on until you get to the end, and I'll meet you back up when you get to that last stitch. Okay, we're on our last stitch. We're going to knit that and lift the back over the front, and all we do is get our scissors out cut a nice little tail, and then pull that on through. There we go. And then we can just take our needle, our tapestry needle, and work that in to where it looks nice and even. Okay, so sometimes when you get finished, you have like a little extra amount of yarn here. And so what you want to do is pull on that yarn and see where the next part comes out from. So we're going to take this and pull that down and then work the stitch here and find where the next one is. And so you're just basically evening up the tension on that yarn. There we go. So when I pull on that one, it's making this one pull. And then I can even that stitch out. And so now it's going to be more even. I don't have that big loop hanging out there. So now I'm going to just weave this tail in, get it down in here. Okay. And then I like to go ahead and get it in to this stitch here where there is a purl bump. And then I follow this little smile kind of part here, and then there's this little umbrella. So I'm going to go up through here and follow that and see how it tucks in nicely and find that stitch. And then I'm going to come over here to where the next one is, and I'm going to go up through here and then down, and I'm following these lines here. Okay. So I'm just going to continue on finding the next spot that works for me and getting the stitch to where it hides. I can even go back through the back of here. So if we don't find the next spot where it goes, see that how it hides now, and now I'm on the other line and I'm back in a place where I can go up or down through a stitch and hide it. So I can go down through this area that I came out through and go around here and up, and I could even go let's see, over here and then down. So sort of like this little hide and seek game here to go around my stitches. And then once I get it to a spot where I'm happy with how much yarn I've put in here, I can take my scissors and cut that off and hide it, and then work on the last part, and then you are done. Now this was the top part, and then this was the bottom, and this particular sample you're going to knit until you have 18 inches, and so it's actually going to be turned onto the side. So the pattern you're seeing in the placemat is going to be side to side. It has these cool little vertical bumps here. All right, and that is it. For the loom version, be sure and print out your copy, and I've got one printed out here. I want to go over a few things. I've got 4 plus 2 here, and this is showing that it's a multiple of 4 plus 2. So your cast on is actually 44 stitches plus the extra 2 that we need to put on these last 2 here. See how there's a multiple of 4 between these 2 parentheses here, and knit 2, purl 2, that's 4. And then you need this extra 2 to make this pattern work. So the reason why you also need this is when you make a small swatch and measure out the gauge, you may need to add some more pegs or have less pegs or change it to a different loom to make the size work out for you. And so that's why it's good to know that number, so that when you change the number of your pegs, that it works out to be a multiple. Okay, so you're going to cast on. Now there's no specific way to cast on, but I'm going to show you the long tail so that it matches the needle version, but you don't have to use that cast on. Then we're going to work the first row and the second row, and then we'll work the third and fourth. So go ahead and mark up your paper so that you can have the conversion. So the first row is on the right side. You don't change anything about it. The second row and the fourth row are the ones that you're going to need to change. All we do in loom knitting is we're going to make the opposite stitch. So where you see a P, it's going to be a knit. So you're going to knit 2 here, and this one's purl 2. And then the last 2 stitches are going to be knit 2. That's it. That's all you have to change on the second row. The third row will remain the same, and then the fourth row is purl 2 and knit 2 and then purl 2. And then also, if you notice, the first and second row look identical now, and the third and fourth row look identical. So you could say knit the first row twice and knit the third row twice, and then you've got the stitch pattern. Okay, so this is a 4-row repeat, and then it will shift back. So you knit the first row and the second row the same, and then you work the third row and fourth row the same, and then you shift back over to the first row. And what will happen is you're going to work something like this, and then work back this way. Okay, working the same thing, work this way and how it alternates, and then work back. And then when you repeat, so this is the first 4 stitches here, first 4 rows here, and then this is the next 4. So you have these 2 sets. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4, and then this is 1, 2, 3, 4, and it continues on, and you work until you get the length that's listed on here. This is actually work until you get 18 inches, and then you're going to cast off in pattern. So I'm going to show you how to cast on and how to make this stitch here, and then we'll bind it off together in pattern. Okay, let's do that now. Okay, I'm going to show you the long tail cast on. We're going to wrap around our finger to make a slip knot, put the back over the front once, and then the back over the front again, and make that slip knot. Make sure your tail is towards you and the ball yarn, our working yarn, is towards the back. We're just going to slip it on one of our pegs here and tighten that up. And then I want to take my working yarn here, and that's going to be wrapped around in a unit stitch. We're going to be working this direction, so it always goes to the front of the peg you're working and to the back. And then we're going to lift the bottom loop over the top loop and make that stitch there. Then the tail is always going to be an E-wrap, okay? And then we're going to U-wrap the top one with the working tail here, the working yarn. So wrap around to the front, and then that gives you 2 loops on there. We're going to lift the bottom loop over the top, and then you could pull on that to make it nice and taut. You don't want it too tight. Okay, so we've got an E-wrap from the tail, a U-wrap from the ball. Hold on to your stitches, knit the bottom loop over the top, and then you've got that cast on. So let's change the angle. E-wrap, U-wrap, knit that stitch, and then pull it. So now you're going to cast on until you get your number of stitches, and then we work the pattern. Pause your video and meet me back up when you have your stitch count. So we're going to make the double moss stitch. I've already cast it on. I cast it from left to right, and I'm going to start with the first stitch, which is a knit stitch. I'm just going to wrap around here loosely and make the knit stitch, and we're just making a U knit stitch. I'm going all the way around the peg and going and making a U. So from front to back, it's like a U. That gives us the extra slack we need. Lift the bottom loop over the top, and you've made that. Now we're going to come to the front here. Don't pull on this one too tight or it'll make this stitch the wrong size. So we're going to hold our working yarn down below the loop. We're going to scoop it up like pulling up from the ocean, make that loop. You're going to pull the old one off and set the new one right back on and pull that together, not too tight, and do the same on the next one. So we're knitting 2 and purling 2. Okay, and so that's the 4-stitch repeat. You're going to need the extra 2 at the end to finish this off correctly. So I've gone and I've knitted on, I put it on 18 stitches for this pattern, but you can do your full amount. I'm going to continue working down until I have knit 2 and purled 2 all the way across, and I will have 2 stitches at the end. Pause your video and meet me back up, and I'll show you what we do next. Okay, I've got the last 2 stitches. I'm knitting 2, and then now we're going to work back in the same exact way. You will in fact knit this last stitch again and then work again in the knit. So work exactly the way you did on the way up, and then on the way back we will just flip-flop that. We will switch what we're doing. Pause your video and I'll show you in a minute. Coming to the end of row 2, I'm knitting 2, and then I'm going to bring my yarn to the front, and we are going to, for row 3, purl 2. Now they're calling this the box stitch pattern on here. This is also called the double moss stitch. There we go. It's being a little fiddly. So we're just going to keep going and work this double moss to where it stacks up on our knitting with 2 purl above 2 knits from the rows before, and we work these in the same order on the way down and back, and then you just simply switch it up when you start on this right side again, and then it's easier to see on the loom. You could even, like, you know, put a little thing here to tell you if you're going to be knitting or purling, and kind of switch back and forth the pegs. I don't know. You could just make up some kind of way to help you remember. And you can also look at the back and see what stitches you have made. Now, it may not be evident here, but let's take a look at what it looks like when I've worked it on this loom over here. And the stitches are really big. You can see how much bigger the stitches are on this particular loom, and it's going to be an open, more waffly weave here, so you would need far less stitches in this particular loom than you would on here. You'll need more stitches per inch than on this loom. It could still be done, but you can see how you can see through it a little bit more, and these stitches are going to be more closed. So you can see how you can tell where these stitches here, you see the outward purl bump here? Well, on the opposite side, it's a knit stitch. So when you see these stitches here doing this, on the front side, they're going to actually be purl stitches, and on the back, you're seeing the knit. So you're going to want to do the opposite. When you see 2 rows of something like this, you're going to want to make it look like this on the back. And that's how you know how to keep going. Just go until you get to the 18 inches, and then I'll meet you back up to show you how to bind that off in pattern, how it states on the pattern. See you in a minute. Okay, I have knit up my sample, and I actually knit it up as long as my, this is my knit sample here, and then I've got my loom knit sample here, and they're actually about the same width. Now it's going to be stretched across the back here, but here is where it's relaxed. So they're actually about the same width. And if you'll notice, the length is different. So my rows are shorter than my knit rows, so you'll actually need to knit more rows in your loom knit sample, but that's okay because we're not going by row, we're going by length here. So you're going to keep going on, but I'm going to show you how to bind off in pattern. And what you'll do is you'll knit the first 2 stitches. So I'm at the end of my 4-row repeat. You can be at the end after you finished a 2nd row or a 4th row. I'm going to knit the first 2 stitches here, and then I'm going to take the 2nd stitch and move it to the 1st, and then work that stitch and move that over to the next stitch. Okay, so if I was continuing on with the row 1, this would be a purl stitch, so I'm actually going to go ahead and purl that stitch here. Okay, and then after I purl it, I'm going to move that stitch over to my 1st stitch and work that stitch bottom over top, move it over, and then we're going to purl the next stitch here, because this would be in the same pattern that I would continue with, and move the 2nd stitch over to the 1st and knit off, move that stitch over, and then we would continue where the next 2 stitches are knit stitches. Now you don't want to pull too tight, or else your pattern is going to get too, like the edge is going to get drawn in too much. So make sure and leave a little bit of slack here. So just work that stitch over and continue binding off in pattern until you get to your last stitch. All right, see you in a little bit. I'm at the end. I've got 2 stitches left. I'm going to knit this last stitch and move it over, lift the bottom over the top, and then we're just going to take this and pull it out and cut it. Okay, and then this is where we've pulled that out, and now you're just going to use your wide-eyed tapestry needle to even up your stitches and then weave that in, and you can see that from the knit stitch video. And now let's look at our sample here. So we finished our stitches here on the loom, and you can see that they're the same width as our needle stitches. You will need to knit longer for more rows than you do on the needles. It's tighter on this particular one. It's a more dense stitch, but for the placemat, I think it's still beautiful. You will be taking it and turning them to the side. So you knit the 18 inches and then it works to the side. So this is how it will look. If you want your stitches to be looser looking and bigger, then you could go up to a different loom, maybe that has 1/2 inch spacing between the pegs. Or you can, of course, go all the way up to the 5/8. These stitches look nice and pillowy on this 5/8, but you might want to pull in your stitches a little bit tighter so that it's not such a loose stitch. I hope you've enjoyed knitting your Easy Life knit placemats from Yarnspirations.com. Be sure and tag us on social media so we can see your place setting for the outdoors. On behalf of Yarnspirations.com and Good Knit Kisses, I'm your host, Kristen, wishing you happy knitting.